why was this policy put into place? Let's understand the background behind it. Let's understand the structure and its intent. What was the thinking behind this? And we get an answer as to why you would specify cannabis rather than just expanding the smoking ordinances from Pete at that meeting as well.
Now, we could have done something similar. I asked Randy. We could have just changed our policy to include cannabis in our smoking regulations. No, I wanted us to be way more transparent than that. I want the public to know that smoking cannabis on town property, if this goes through, is illegal. And there's a proper mechanism put in place, which happens to be town council and this ordinance.
So in this case, he's recommended this ordinance. Well, the town council has requested that the town attorneys draft an ordinance that would prohibit the smoking and vaping of cannabis on town properties, primarily. And instead of just expanding the existing definitions, he wants to be explicit about it. He wants to make it so that there's absolute certainty and clarity on what it is they're prohibiting, where, how, and basically why. And of course, there is the secondary characteristic as to why you wouldn't just allow it in general of secondhand smoke. And we're going to get into that in just a minute here, but the idea is that when you're chewing a gummy, when you're sucking a lollipop, when you're chewing chewing gum, there's no way that you can be interfering with my consent in doing that because it doesn't affect me in any way, right? Like if you're breathing smoke into my face, regardless of what smoke that is, it could just be campfire smoke for all that matters. The fact that it is being blown into my face means that there is an element of consent that's removed. So returning the element of consent would be to preclude that from happening, at least in a legal manner. Now, again, there's a difference between private and public sector. And the reason there's a difference between the private and public sector, of course, is that in the public sector, everyone has right to that property. In the private sector, I can, if you come into my property as an adult and I can exclude kids, it's private property. I can tell people, listen, you're not allowed to come in if you're under 18. Deal with it. You're not allowed to come into my bar unless you're under 21 or unless you're over 21 or over. Deal with it, right? You can exclude whoever you want. And in doing so, you can basically have well-documented, it can be well-documented that you guys are a place where there's going to be clouds of smoke. S.J. Barrington's in the 90s, right? It's a place there, going into that bar, number one, you're not going to be allowed, you're not supposed to be allowed in if you're under 21. And on top of that, it's going to be a place that's just going to have a cloud of smoke over it, right? In that case, we can know that there's consent because we have an informed public on the fact that that's the matter. Anyone can go in and instantly recognize that that's the case. And on top of that, we don't have any kids involved, which means that kids can't consent. Children can't consent. Now, where exactly that age of consent should be in Connecticut, it's 16. When it comes to consent, when it comes to things like the purchase of tobacco products, I think they just upped it to 21. It was 18 for a long time. When it comes to alcohol, it's 21. So again, even the state of Connecticut can't pick where the age of consent ought to be. But the point is that below a certain age, children cannot offer consent, which is why when you have something like a town property, you have to allow anyone to be on that property. All you can control really is time and manner, right? You can't tell somebody who's under 18 they can't go to town council. They can't go to a town council meeting. You can't do that. And because of that, then what you have is a problem with secondhand smoke. It's the same argument for regulation when it comes to pollution. If you're going to pollute the river and that river is necessarily upstream of my property, you've now affected my property directly. You've involved me into this transaction, which was supposed to have mutual consent without my consent. If you're in a situation where it's a pond and every single property in that pond understands that all of their septic tanks are just all of their septic is going straight into the pond, you have implied consent because there's no way it's going to affect anything other than the properties that are doing the thing in the first place.